My name is Sarah Bennett. I am 32 years old. 4 years ago, my mother convinced me to hand over nearly $80,000 from the savings I had built after selling my small consulting firm so she could help my sister through a rough patch, only for me to learn later that the money had quietly disappeared into my mother's own hidden credit card debts she'd been running up for months. Right now, I am sitting in a hushed conference room at my lawyer's office in a suburban neighborhood outside Raleigh, with my mother across the table, sliding a thick folder toward me and announcing in that calm, clipped voice she uses when she is about to take something away that she and my father have decided it is time they move into my house permanently, because recent events have shown I am clearly not capable of managing my own life anymore. And she has already spoken to my doctor about my emotional state without telling me. My stomach tightened into a knot, but in that moment I knew with absolute clarity that this time I would not let her rewrite my story or erase the independence I had fought so hard to keep. If you have ever felt your own mother turning your life into her latest project under the excuse of love, drop a comment below and tell me how it started for you, because hearing your stories is the only thing that makes me feel less alone right now. The whole thing had been building for almost 2 years in these small, quiet ways that at first seemed like normal family concern. I had worked as a senior project coordinator at a mid-size marketing agency in Raleigh for 11 years straight out of college, and the consulting side hustle I ran on evenings and weekends had finally sold for $1.7 million 2 years earlier after a lot of late nights and careful planning. That money let me pay off my modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs, buy a reliable car, and set aside enough that I did not have to worry about every unexpected bill. My mother had been the first to call the day the sale closed, her tone bright and full of questions about how much I had actually cleared and whether I had thought about helping my sister, who was going through another one of her on-again, off-again situations with her husband Mark. I gave her the benefit of the doubt back then, because that is what daughters do, especially when my father stays mostly quiet in the background, nodding along like he always has. But the calls started coming more often after that. My mother would phone on Sunday evenings and slip in comments about how nice it must be to have that kind of cushion, while the rest of the family was still scraping by. She never asked outright at first. Instead, she would mention how my sister and Mark were looking at a bigger apartment because their current place was too cramped for the 2 kids, or how my father's retirement savings had taken a hit when the market dipped last spring. Every conversation ended with a little sigh and the suggestion that maybe I could step up the way family is supposed to. I started giving small amounts here and there, $5,500 for a car repair, or $12,000 toward my sister's medical bills after a minor procedure, because refusing felt like I was being selfish. My mother always thanked me with that warm voice that made me feel like I was finally doing the right thing, but something in her eyes when we met for coffee never quite matched the words. Then the tone shifted. Last spring, I went through a painful breakup with the man I had been seeing for almost 3 years. It was not dramatic, just the slow realization that we wanted different futures, and the split left me raw for a few months. I took some time off work focused on therapy and leaned on my best friend Rachel Hayes, who had been with me since college and worked in the same building. Rachel was the one who noticed how often my mother was suddenly showing up unannounced or texting late at night to check if I was okay. She told me it seemed off, but I brushed it aside because mothers worry, right? What I did not know was that my mother had already made a call to my primary care doctor, Dr. Amanda Foster, claiming she was concerned about my mental stability after the breakup and asking if there was any way to get me evaluated for possible depression that might affect my decision-making. Dr. Foster later told me she had refused to discuss anything without my consent, but the inquiry itself had been logged. That was when the pressure became impossible to ignore. My mother started showing up at my house on weeknights with folders of printed articles about adult children who made bad financial choices after emotional setbacks. She would sit at my kitchen table and speak in that soft, reasonable voice about how maybe it was time for her and my father to move closer so they could help me manage things properly. I told her I was fine. I had a good job, a paid-off house, and a solid therapist. She would smile and pat my hand and say, "Of course you think you are fine, dear, but we both know you have always needed a little guidance." The words landed like small cuts because they carried that undercurrent of contempt she had perfected over the years, the one that reminded me I had never quite measured up to whatever image she had in her head for her younger daughter. I tried talking to my father about it one afternoon when my mother was out running errands. He shifted in his chair, looked at the floor, and said, "Your mother just wants what is best, Sarah. You know how she is." It was the same response he had given my whole life whenever she pushed too hard, and I felt the familiar frustration rise, but I swallowed it because arguing with him never changed anything. Instead, I started keeping records of every conversation, every request for money, every comment about my competence. Something in my gut told me this was heading somewhere darker, and I needed proof if it ever came to a real fight. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening, 2 weeks before the lawyer meeting. I had just gotten home from work, exhausted after closing a big client account, when my mother pulled into the driveway with my father in the passenger seat and luggage visible in the back. She did not even wait for me to invite them inside. She stepped out of the car, arms crossed, and announced, "We have talked it over, Sarah. Your father and I are moving in. This is our place now, too." A fresh start for the whole family. My sister had apparently been looped in because she sent a text right after they arrived that read, "Mom is only trying to protect you. Stop being so dramatic." I stood there on my own porch feeling the ground tilt under me, but I kept my voice steady and told them we needed to sit down and discuss this. Like adults. Inside, my mother wasted no time pulling out a new folder, this one containing forms for a durable power of attorney, and a letter she had drafted to my bank asking them to add her as a joint signer on my main accounts. She slid them across the table and said, "It is for your own good, honey. You have been under so much stress lately, and we cannot watch you throw away everything we work to give you." That night, after they left, I called Michael Hargrove, the family law attorney Rachel had recommended, after hearing one too many of my stories. He listened without interrupting, then told me what my mother was doing had a name, and it was more common than most people wanted to admit, especially when money and control were involved. He suggested I hire a private investigator right away, someone discreet who could look into any financial trails or medical inquiries she might have made without my knowledge. I agreed on the spot, and the next morning I met with Laura Simmons, a former fraud investigator who ran her own firm out of a small office downtown. Laura was sharp and unsentimental. She took notes, asked for every text message and bank statement I could share, and promised to have something solid within 10 days. In the meantime, my mother kept the pressure constant. She called every day, sometimes twice, reminding me how lonely the house would feel if I insisted on living alone, and how my sister thought it was the responsible choice for everyone. My father stayed mostly silent on the calls, but once I overheard him in the background saying, "Patricia, maybe we should slow down," and my mother cut him off with a sharp hush. "Robert, this is for her own good." The words sent a chill through me, because they confirmed what I had always suspected, that my father saw the pattern, but chose the path of least resistance every single time. I started sleeping less, waking up in the middle of the night, wondering how far my mother would go if I said no outright. By the time I walked into Michael Hargrove's office for that first formal meeting, I had already gathered copies of my own financial records, a clean bill of mental health from an independent therapist I had seen privately, and a timeline of every request my mother had made over the past 20 months. Laura Simmons had joined us via video because she had uncovered the first real red flag. My mother had apparently used my name on a credit application 6 months earlier without telling me, claiming I had authorized her as a reference. The application had been denied, but the inquiry itself had dinged my credit score slightly, and Laura suspected there were more attempts like it. Michael laid everything out calmly and advised me to get a second opinion from a specialist in financial exploitation cases. That was when Karen Whitaker, a sharp elder and family law attorney with a reputation for tough cases, stepped into the room and reviewed the file. She looked at me across the table and said, "Sarah, what your mother is attempting is a classic pattern of control disguised as care. We are going to document everything, and when she makes her next move, we will be ready." I left the office that day with a plan and a folder of my own, but the knot in my stomach had not loosened. My mother had texted me on the drive home asking if I had thought any more about the moving in idea and whether I wanted her to bring over some of her furniture this weekend. I did not answer. Instead, I sat in my car in the parking lot, staring at the screen, feeling the weight of every small violation she had piled on me over the years. Rachel called a few minutes later, checking in, and when I told her what Laura had found, she let out a low whistle and said, "You know, this is only the beginning, right?" I knew she was right. What I did not know yet was that my mother had already taken the next step without me, and the discovery would hit harder than anything I had prepared for. Rachel's words hung in the air as I sat in the parking lot staring at my phone screen, the knot in my stomach tightening with every passing second. I told her everything Laura Simmons had uncovered about the credit application, and she listened quietly before saying, "Sarah, this is getting serious. You need to stay one step ahead because my mother is not going to stop at small things." I thanked her for being there and hung up, then drove home, with my mind racing on what my mother might try next. The following week, I scheduled a session with my new therapist, Dr. Elena Vargas, who specialized in family dynamics and boundary issues. She listened as I laid out the pattern of my mother's pressure and the recent medical inquiries, and she nodded slowly before saying, "This sounds like a classic case of emotional coercion, where the parent uses concern as a weapon to maintain control." The words validated what I had been feeling, and I left the session feeling a bit stronger but still on edge, because I knew my mother would not let this go easily. That same afternoon at the marketing agency, my coworker Brian Caldwell, who had worked on several projects with me over the years, pulled me aside in the break room. He had noticed I looked exhausted and asked if everything was all right at home. I gave him a shortened version and he shook his head, saying, "Family can be the hardest pressure sometimes, especially when they think they know what is best for you." His words stuck with me because they reminded me that outsiders could see the pattern, even if my father chose not to. The real escalation happened that Friday evening. I had just finished dinner when my mother and my father showed up again, this time with my sister and her 2 young children in tow. My mother did not knock. She simply used the spare key I had given her years ago for emergencies and walked right into the living room. She looked around the space with a critical eye and announced in front of everyone that the house needed some rearranging if we were all going to live here comfortably. My sister stood beside her, nodding along with that familiar expression of agreement she always wore when siding with my mother. The children ran straight to the television like they already owned the place. I felt my blood run hot and asked what exactly they thought they were doing. My mother turned to me with a small, tight smile and said, "Sarah, we are not asking anymore. After everything you have put this family through with your impulsive decisions and that messy breakup, it is clear you need structure." The way she said impulsive decisions carried such cold sarcasm, it hit me like a physical blow, exposing years of her seeing me as the unreliable one. My father stood by the doorway, his jaw clenched in that way he did when he was biting back words. For a moment, I thought he might speak up, but when my mother shot him a look, he simply muttered something about needing fresh air and stepped outside. Later, I would overhear him in the driveway telling her quietly that this was moving too fast and that she was pushing too hard, but she shut him down immediately with a sharp reminder that she was doing what he never had the spine to do. That private exchange only made the situation feel more isolating, because even when my father saw the problem, he still would not stand against her in the open. My mother continued her attack without missing a beat, turning back to me and saying with venomous sweetness that if I really cared about my nieces, I would stop being so selfish and think about what was best for the whole family. She then pulled out another set of documents, this time including a draft email she planned to send to my boss at the agency, suggesting that my recent stress might affect my performance and that perhaps a family support system was needed. The room felt smaller with every word. My sister chimed in at that point, echoing my mother by saying I had always been the one who pulled away from family obligations and that accepting help was not a weakness. The psychological jabs kept coming, my mother reminding me how I had never married or had children of my own, while my sister had built a real life. She framed it all as concern, but the contempt underneath was unmistakable. I stood there absorbing the hits, feeling the old familiar heartbreak mixed with rising anger. Before I could respond fully, my phone buzzed with a message from Laura, the private investigator. The text was short, but it stopped my heart. She had found evidence that my mother had contacted my bank 2 weeks earlier, attempting to add herself as an authorized signer using an old joint account detail from when I was in college. The request had been denied, but the inquiry was there in black and white. I excused myself to the kitchen under the pretense of getting water, trying to steady my breathing. When I returned, my mother was already talking about timelines, saying they could have most of their things moved in by the end of next month. She delivered the next line with particular sharpness, telling me that fighting this would only prove I was not thinking clearly, and that she had already spoken with a specialist about possible conservatorship options if I continued to resist reasonable family support. The word conservatorship hung in the air like a threat. My sister looked uncomfortable for a split second, but quickly smoothed it over by busying herself with one of the kids. That was the moment the full weight settled in, that this was not just about moving in. It was about control total and complete. I told them all as calmly as I could that I needed time to think and that they should leave for now. My mother gave me one last piercing look and said, "Do not take too long, Sarah, because some decisions have deadlines." As they gathered the children and headed out the door, I caught my father glancing back at me with something like regret in his eyes, but he said nothing. The house felt hollow once they were gone. I called Michael, the lawyer, immediately, and he picked up on the first ring. When I relayed the new details, including the bank attempt and the conservatorship mention, he told me we needed to accelerate everything. He scheduled an urgent meeting for Monday morning with Karen and Laura, both on the line. Hanging up, I sat on my couch, staring at the wall, the mini cliffhanger of what they might do next, keeping me wired. But the biggest shock came late that night. Just before midnight, my phone lit up with an email notification from an unknown address. It was a forwarded copy of preliminary paperwork my mother had apparently filed with a local court earlier that week, outlining concerns about my capacity to manage my affairs and requesting a temporary guardianship evaluation. My name was listed as the respondent, and her signature was at the bottom as petitioner. The document referenced the doctor inquiry and my recent breakup as evidence of instability. I read it twice, my hands going cold. She had not just talked about it. She had already started the legal process behind my back. That email from the unknown address changed everything in an instant. I sat there in the dark, staring at the screen, rereading the preliminary guardianship paperwork my mother had filed. She had listed specific concerns about my emotional stability and referenced the doctor inquiry as proof I could not manage alone. My hands shook as I forwarded it to Michael and Laura right away. The next morning, they both confirmed it was a real filing, though still in early stages. This was the moment I realized how far she had gone without a single, direct conversation. I barely slept that night, the discovery sitting like a weight on my chest. First thing Monday, I drove straight to Michael Hargrove's office where Laura Simmons and Karen Whitaker joined by video. They laid out the next steps with calm precision. Karen explained that we could file an immediate response challenging the petition with my independent therapist's evaluation and the full timeline of events. Laura had dug deeper over the weekend and uncovered one more layer that made my stomach drop. My mother had reached out to a former colleague of mine at the marketing agency 2 weeks earlier under the guise of checking on my well-being after the breakup. The message hinted that my recent stress might be impacting my reliability at work. It had not gone anywhere yet, but the intent was clear. My mother was building a case from every angle, and she had started it all while smiling through our last family dinner. The team advised me to stay silent for now and let them handle the formal response. I left the meeting with a thick folder of my own evidence and a court date set for 3 weeks later. The suspense of waiting gnawed at me every hour. What if she escalated before then? What if she showed up at my door again with more papers, or worse, with my sister in tow to turn it into a public family intervention? I kept my phone on silent most of the day, but the calls still came. My mother left 3 voicemails that afternoon, each one laced with that same clipped sweetness. In the last one, she said, "Sarah, I know you are upset, but ignoring this will only make things harder for everyone, especially you. It is time to stop pretending you have it all together." That evening, I was at home trying to eat something when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find my mother standing there alone this time, her face set in that calm mask she wore when she was about to deliver a blow. She did not wait for an invitation. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her, saying in a voice dripping with false concern, "We need to talk about the court filing before this gets ugly." I told her I already knew and that my lawyer would handle it. She laughed softly, a short, sharp sound that carried no warmth. "Oh, Sarah, always hiding behind lawyers now, are we? That is exactly why I had to step in. You have spent your whole life making impulsive choices like selling that little business and thinking you could live without real family support. It is embarrassing how you act like you are above all this when my sister has built something stable." The sarcasm cut deep because it exposed the long-held resentment she had never said out loud before. She kept going, her eyes narrowing. "You think your independence makes you better, but it has only made my sister look bad in comparison, and I will not let you drag this family down with your selfishness." My father had apparently driven her over and was waiting in the car. When she called him inside to back her up, he walked in with a look of shock crossing his face. First, then something shifted. He interrupted her mid-sentence with a defensive outburst that surprised us both. "Patricia, that is enough. You cannot just spring this on her like this in her own home." His voice rose for the first time I could remember in a family conflict. My mother turned on him with a withering stare, but he held his ground for a few seconds before the moment passed and he looked away, muttering that he just wanted peace. It was the closest he had ever come to pushing back openly, and it left the air thick with tension. Later that night, after she had stormed out, he called me privately from his phone. His voice was quiet and full of regret as he tried to explain that he saw what she was doing, but he did not know how to stop her without tearing everything apart. The private conversation felt like a small crack in the wall, but it changed nothing in the end because he still would not stand with me publicly. The next 2 weeks became a blur of preparation and quiet dread. Rachel came over one evening with takeout and listened as I vented about the latest voicemail from my mother. She offered to testify if needed, but I told her I wanted to keep my friends out of the mess. Brian from work texted daily, checking in after he had heard rumors floating around the office about family issues affecting my focus. I appreciated the support, but every kind word reminded me how isolated the conflict was making me feel. My mother did not stop. She sent a long email copied to my sister and my father, outlining all the ways I had supposedly failed the family over the years, framing my success as luck and my boundaries as cruelty. The psychological jabs kept landing one after another, each one designed to make me doubt myself. A day before the court date, she left another message, this time hinting that if I fought her, she would make sure everyone in our extended circle knew how unstable I had become. The threat hung there like a timed bomb. The morning of the hearing, I walked into the courthouse with Michael and Karen at my side. My mother was already there, seated with my father and my sister beside her. She initiated the moment she saw me by leaning forward and saying loud enough for the hallway to hear Sarah, "This could have been handled privately if you had not turned it into a spectacle. Your refusal to accept help just proves my point." The sarcasm in her tone was razor sharp, and the way she smiled at the court clerk made my skin crawl. My father sat rigid beside her, his face showing that same quiet anger from before, but he said nothing when she continued her attack. My sister nodded along, adding her own line about how I was always the dramatic one. The judge listened to both sides and ultimately tabled the guardianship petition for further review, citing the need for more evidence. It was not a win, but it bought me time. After the hearing, my mother cornered me in the parking lot, her voice low and venomous. "You think this is over? I have given you everything, and this is how you repay me by embarrassing the family in public." She listed every small choice I had made that disappointed her, from not marrying early to focusing on my career instead of helping raise my nieces. The resentment poured out in a steady stream of cutting remarks that left me breathless. My father stood a few feet away, watching with visible strain before he finally pulled her away with a firm hand on her arm, saying, "We should go home now." It was another small act, but too little too late. I went home that afternoon and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. The house felt both safe and empty. I drafted a message to my mother, my father, and my sister outlining clear boundaries. No more unannounced visits. No more financial discussions. No more medical inquiries or court filings without my direct consent. I told them I loved them, but I could not continue a relationship built on control and contempt. I hit send and then blocked their numbers. Rachel called later that night, and I told her what I had done. She said she was proud of me, but I could hear the worry in her voice because she knew what it cost. Brian sent a supportive text from work the next day, but even that felt distant now. Weeks turned into months. My mother tried once through a mutual family friend to reach out, but I held firm. My father left a single voicemail months later saying he missed me and wished things were different, but he never followed through with any real change. My sister sent a short note claiming I had broken the family apart. The silence that followed was deafening. I kept my job, threw myself into new projects, and even started volunteering at a local women's center on weekends. On paper, my life looked steady. Inside, the loneliness settled in like a quiet companion. I had chosen myself, but the price was the family ties I had once believed were unbreakable. Some mornings I still caught myself wondering if I could have done something different, but then I remembered her voice in that parking lot and the paperwork she filed in secret. The boundaries had saved me, even if they left me standing alone. This story still hurts to tell, because walking away from your own mother feels like carving out a piece of yourself. I never thought protecting my peace would mean losing the people who were supposed to love me most, but here I am learning to live with the quiet. If you have ever set a boundary that cost you everything, drop a comment and share what it taught you, because knowing I am not the only one makes the isolation feel a little less heavy. Thank you for listening to my story. If my experience resonates with you, please like and subscribe so more people can find these honest conversations. And remember that choosing yourself is never the wrong path, even when it leaves you standing on your own.